Every morning, the Mafia boss's baby girl woke up weaker, pale, listless, fading. Doctors found nothing. But the new maid saw what everyone missed: tiny scratches hidden in the baby's hair, appearing every single night. What she discovered next made her the most dangerous person in the mansion. The scream came at 5:47 a.m. Mira Chin dropped the stack of folded linen she'd been carrying and ran toward the nursery. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble floor of the Leonetti mansion's east wing. She'd only been working here for 3 days, but she already knew that sound. The raw, guttural roar of Alessandro Leonetti when something went wrong. She reached the nursery door just as it flew open. A man in his late 30s stormed out, his tailored black suit perfectly pressed despite the early hour, his dark hair slicked back with precision.
Alessandro Leonetti.
The man whose name made politicians nervous and whose business empire stretched from New York to Sicily, though everyone knew his real business had nothing to do with the import-export company listed on paper. Get Dr. Hamish. Now his voice was ice. The head nanny, Mrs. Delacroix, a stern woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, hurried after him. Mr. Leonetti, please, the baby just needs. I said now. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Mira pressed herself against the wall as Alessandro strode past, already barking orders into his phone. She caught a glimpse of his face, jaw clenched, eyes burning with something between rage and fear. A dangerous combination in a man like him. Mrs. Delacroix noticed Mira standing there. Don't just stand there gawking, girl. The baby needs fresh bedding. Go. Mira nodded and slipped into the nursery. The room was enormous, decorated in soft creams and golds, with a hand-carved Italian crib positioned near the window. Morning light filtered through sheer curtains, casting everything in a gentle glow that felt wrong somehow, too peaceful for whatever had just happened. In the crib lay Valentina Leonetti, 8 months old, the daughter Alessandro had with his late wife Maria, who died in childbirth. The baby was awake, but barely. Her usually bright brown eyes were half closed, her tiny body limp against the silk sheets. She wasn't crying. That was worse. Mira approached slowly, her heart hammering. She wasn't officially assigned to baby care. She was just general housekeeping, but something pulled her forward. Valentina's skin looked pale, almost translucent in the morning light. Her breathing was shallow. Hey there, sweet girl, Mira whispered, reaching out to gently touch the baby's hand. Valentina's fingers didn't curl around hers like they had yesterday, when Mira had peeked in during her rounds. What's wrong with you? Footsteps thundered back down the hallway. Alessandro returned with an elderly man carrying a medical bag, Dr. Hamish, presumably. The doctor looked like he'd been roused from sleep, his shirt buttoned wrong, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Out, Alessandro said to Mira, without looking at her. She moved toward the door but lingered just outside, listening. Tell me what I'm looking at, doctor. There was a pause, the sound of the doctor examining the baby, soft clucks of his tongue. Her vitals are
weak.
Heart rate is lower than I'd like. Has she been eating? Mrs. Delacroix? Alessandro's voice was tight. She took her bottle last night, Mr. Leonetti. 8 ounces. She's been sleeping through the night beautifully, the nanny sounded defensive. Then, why does she look half dead? I don't know, sir. Yesterday, she was fine. Active, smiling. This morning, she just seems tired. More silence. Mira imagined the doctor running tests, checking the baby's responses. She shouldn't care this much. She'd been hired to clean, to stay invisible, to collect a paycheck that was 3 times what she'd made at her last job. But something about that little girl's listless expression haunted her. Could be a virus, Dr. Hamish finally said. Infants can go downhill quickly with a fever or infection, then bounce back just as fast. I recommend observation. If she's not better by noon, we'll run blood work. She'll be better by noon, Alessandro said flatly, as if he could command his daughter's health the way he commanded everything else. They emerged from the nursery. Dr. Hamish headed toward the stairs, medical bag in hand. Alessandro stood in the doorway, staring at his daughter with an expression Mira couldn't quite read. Grief? Fear?
Guilt.
You, he said suddenly, turning to Mira. What's your name? Mira Chun, sir. How long have you worked here? 3 days, Mr. Leonetti. His eyes narrowed, assessing her. She was small, barely 5'3", with straight black hair pulled into a practical ponytail. 26 years old, but often mistaken for younger. Forgettable. That's what had made her good at her previous job as a private care aide. People talked freely around her because they forgot she was there. You have experience with children?
Some.
I worked at a nursing home before this, but I helped with my nephew when he was a baby. Alessandro studied her for another moment, then jerked his head toward the nursery. Go in. Change the sheets, but do it quietly. If you wake her, you're fired. Yes, sir. Mira moved past him into the room, hyper-aware of his presence in the doorway, watching. She gathered the fresh linens she'd dropped in the hallway and began carefully lifting the baby from the crib. Valentina was so light, so fragile. Mira supported her head the way she'd been taught, cradling her against her chest while she worked to strip the bedding one-handed. That's when she felt it. Valentina's head lolling slightly, her fine dark hair brushing against Myra's palm. Something wasn't right. The texture was off. Mira shifted the baby carefully, tilting her head just slightly to catch the light.
There.
At the crown of Valentina's head, where the hair was thickest, were tiny red marks. Scratches. Fresh ones. They formed a pattern, 3 parallel lines, each about an inch long, barely visible against the baby's scalp. Myra's breath caught. She looked up. Alessandro had left the doorway, his voice drifting from down the hall as he spoke to someone on the phone. Mrs. Delacroix was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Leonetti? Mira called out, keeping her voice calm and steady. He reappeared instantly, phone still pressed to his ear. He held up one finger. Wait. Mr. Leonetti, I need to show you something. His expression darkened at the interruption, but he ended the call. What? Mira turned the baby carefully so he could see. There are scratches on her head. Fresh ones. Did Dr. Hamish check her scalp? Alessandro moved closer, his tall frame towering over her. He reached out, touching his daughter's head with surprising gentleness. His jaw tightened. Delacroix, he bellowed. The nanny appeared within seconds, slightly out of breath. Sir? Did you scratch my daughter's head? Mrs. Delacroix's face went white. What?
No.
Of course not, Mr. Leonetti. I would never. Then explain these marks. The nanny leaned in, squinting. Those weren't there last night. She must have scratched herself. Babies do that. She probably needs her nails trimmed. Mira looked down at Valentina's tiny hands. The nails were perfectly trimmed, filed smooth.
Nora Fegis.
Her nails are fine, Mira said quietly. Mrs. Delacroix's eyes snapped to her, cold and hostile. And what would you know about it? You've been here 3 days. You're a cleaning girl, not a nanny, she turned back to Alessandro. Sir, the baby is fine. She's probably just fighting off a cold. This girl is inexperienced and overreacting. She's probably the one who hurt Valentina with rough handling. Alessandro's gaze moved between them, calculating. Mira could feel the weight of his suspicions settling on her shoulders. She was new. She was nobody. Of course he'd believe the nanny who'd been with the family for years. I didn't hurt her, Mira said evenly, meeting his eyes. I'm just telling you what I found. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Get out, Alessandro finally said. Myra's stomach dropped. Sir. Both of you.
Out. Now.
They left. Myra's hands were shaking as she walked down the hallway, Mrs. Delacroix's heels clicking furiously beside her. You stupid little bitch, the nanny hissed once they were out of earshot. Do you have any idea what you've just done? You never, ever questioned me in front of Mr. Leonetti. Never. Mira said nothing. She'd seen enough in her 3 days to know that arguing with Mrs. Delacroix would only make things worse. But as she descended the servants' stairs to the basement level where her room was located, one thought circled her mind like a vulture. Those scratches weren't self-inflicted. Someone had hurt that baby. And if it happened once, it would happen again. The private clinic was 40 minutes outside the city, tucked behind iron gates and manicured hedges that screamed money and secrets. Mira hadn't been told to come, but when Alessandro's convoy of black SUVs left the mansion at noon with Valentina, she'd slipped into the last vehicle before anyone could stop her. No one questioned her. In a household of 30 staff members, one extra body was easy to miss. The clinic looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Marble floors, abstract art on the walls, soft classical music playing from hidden speakers. Mira stayed in the background as Alessandro carried Valentina through automatic doors that whispered open. Mrs. Delacroix walked beside him, her face composed but her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. A team of specialists in pressed white coats appeared immediately. They moved like a choreographed dance, whisking Valentina into an examination room while Alessandro followed, his presence filling the hallway like a storm about to break. Mira found a chair in the waiting area. 20 minutes passed, then 40. She watched Mrs. Delacroix pace near the window, occasionally checking her phone. The nanny's jaw was tight, her movements jerky. Nervous? Or angry? At the hour mark, Alessandro emerged. His expression was unreadable, but his shoulders had relaxed slightly. A doctor in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair stood beside him. Mr. Leonetti, I understand your concern, but I need you to hear me clearly. The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. Your daughter is healthy. Her blood work is perfect. Her heart, lungs, reflexes. Everything is functioning exactly as it should for an 8-month-old. Then why was she limp this morning? Why does she keep getting weaker? The doctor exchanged a glance with her colleague, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses. Infants go through phases. Sleep regression is common at this age. She might be teething, which can cause discomfort and fatigue. Or she's simply growing. That takes enormous energy. She had scratches on her head. We examined her scalp thoroughly. There are some minor abrasions, yes, but nothing alarming. Babies explore with their hands, Mr. Leonetti. They scratch, they pull at their hair. It's developmental. Mira watched Alessandro's hands curl into fists at his sides. He wasn't satisfied, but he was also a man who dealt uncertainties, in problems that could be solved with money or force. When doctors with degrees from Harvard told him his daughter was fine, what could he say? I want her monitored overnight, he said finally. That's not necessary. I'm not asking. The doctor sighed but nodded. Of course. We'll set up a private room. But Mr. Leonetti, you need to rest too. Stress affects everyone in the household, including Valentina. Children sense tension. Alessandro didn't respond. He simply turned and walked back toward the examination room. Mrs. Delacroix approached the doctors, her voice saccharine sweet. Thank you for being so patient with him. He's been through so much since losing his wife. Every little thing with a baby terrifies him. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think part of the problem is the new staff. This morning, one of the cleaning girls was handling Valentina roughly, and I believe that's where those scratches came from. The girl is inexperienced, but Mr. Leonetti won't listen. Myra's blood went cold. The younger doctor frowned. If there's concern about improper handling, that should be reported. Oh, I'm handling it internally. I just wanted you to know, in case there are any questions later. Mrs. Delacroix smiled warmly. We take Valentina's safety very seriously. The doctors nodded and moved away to consult their charts. Mrs. Delacroix turned, and her eyes landed directly on Mira sitting in the corner. The smile vanished. She crossed the waiting room in quick, sharp strides. What are you doing here? Mira stood. I wanted to make sure Valentina was okay. That's not your concern. Your housekeeping, not medical staff. Mrs. Delacroix leaned in close enough that Mira could smell her expensive perfume. You're already on thin ice, girl. Mr. Leonetti doesn't tolerate troublemakers. Do you understand what happens to people who cause problems in this family? The threat was clear. Mira had heard the stories, whispered conversations between other staff members about people who'd crossed Alessandro Leonetti and simply disappeared. She'd told herself those were exaggerations, Urban legends meant to scare new employees into obedience. Looking into Mrs. Delacroix's cold eyes, she wasn't so sure anymore. "I understand," Mira said quietly. "Good. Now get back to the mansion and do your actual job. Clean the East Wing bathrooms. All of them. By tonight." It was busy work, punishment disguised as duty. Mira nodded and headed toward the exit. But as she pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon sunshine, she glanced back through the window. Alessandro stood in the examination room doorway, holding Valentina against his chest. The baby's head rested on his shoulder, and even from a distance, Mira could see how carefully he supported her, how his large hand cradled her skull with infinite gentleness. A man who loved his daughter that much wouldn't ignore real danger. He just needed proof he couldn't dismiss. And Mrs. Delacroix's eagerness to blame Mira, to paint her as the threat, that wasn't the behavior of an innocent woman. That was the behavior of someone with something to hide. Mira pulled out her phone and opened the camera app. She began recording a voice memo as she walked to the parking lot. Day 3. Valentina Leonetti showing signs of repeated weakness. Scratches found on scalp, parallel marks, deliberate pattern. Medical team found nothing wrong. Head nanny deflecting blame onto me. She paused, then added, "Something is very wrong in that house. And I'm going to find out what." The laundry room was in the mansion's basement, a massive space lined with industrial washers and dryers that hummed constantly. Mira had volunteered for the night shift, 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., telling the head housekeeper she needed the extra hours. The truth was she needed access. It was 1:15 a.m. when she finally had the nursery bedding in her hands. The other night staff were on different floors, 2 security guards monitoring cameras in the West Wing, a cook preparing tomorrow's breakfast in the kitchen. Mira worked alone, sorting through the delicate fabrics under the fluorescent lights. She started with the fitted crib sheet, examining every inch of pale pink cotton. Nothing. The blanket was next, hand-embroidered, probably worth more than Myra's monthly salary. Also nothing. Then she found the pillowcase. Tiny strands of dark hair clung to the fabric, so fine they were almost invisible. Mira held the pillowcase up to the light, her breath catching. The hair wasn't just shed naturally, the ends were blunt, cut clean. She pulled a strand free and examined it under the magnifying lamp used for inspecting delicate fabrics. The hair had been shaved. Not pulled, not broken. Shaved with something incredibly sharp. Myra's hands trembled as she placed the hair strands in a small plastic bag she'd brought from the kitchen. She photographed them with her phone, making sure the timestamp was visible. Then she continued her search. More strands appeared on the second pillowcase, the one from earlier in the week, and on a burp cloth tucked at the bottom of the laundry bin. All of them showed the same blunt cuts, the same microscopic precision. Someone was cutting Valentina's hair while she slept. But why? Mira glanced at the clock, 1:47 a.m. She still had an hour before the night nurse made her rounds past the laundry room. She quickly finished processing the bedding, then made her way upstairs. The mansion was different at night. Shadows pooled in corners, and the grandeur that impressed visitors during the day became oppressive in the darkness. Mira moved silently through the hallways, avoiding the security cameras she'd memorized over the past week. The nursery was on the second floor, East Wing. Mira had no business being there, especially not at 2 in the morning. But she'd noticed something during her cleaning shifts. There was a linen closet directly across from the nursery door, deep enough to hide in if you stood behind the stacked towels. She slipped inside and pulled the door almost closed, leaving just enough gap to see through. And she waited. The minutes crawled by. Her legs began to ache from standing motionless. Doubt crept in. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there were only coincidences. Maybe Mrs. Delacroix was right, and she was just an inexperienced girl who didn't understand how babies worked. Then, at 3:27 a.m., a shadow moved at the end of the hallway. Myra's heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed herself further back into the closet, peering through the crack. A figure approached the nursery door, female, medium height, moving with practiced silence. The woman paused, glancing left and right, then produced a key from her pocket. The door opened without a sound. Even in the dim hallway lighting, Mira recognized the silver, hair pulled into its perfect bun. Mrs. Delacroix. The nanny disappeared into the nursery. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Myra's mind raced. She should leave, go back downstairs, pretend she'd seen nothing. But Valentina was in there, helpless, and whatever Mrs. Delacroix was doing happened at night when no one was watching. She counted to 30, then slipped out of the closet. The nursery door was thick, expensive wood. No sound came from inside. Myra's hand hovered over the handle, her entire body screaming at her to run. Instead, she knocked softly 3 gentle taps. Mrs. Delacroix? I heard something. Is everything okay? Silence. Then footsteps, quick and light. The door opened 6 inches. Mrs. Delacroix's face appeared in the gap, her expression tight. What are you doing on this floor? I was cleaning the library and heard a noise. I wanted to make sure. The baby is fine. I'm adjusting her pillow. She was sleeping at an angle. Mrs. Delacroix's voice was clipped, annoyed. Go back to work. Of course. I just wanted to check. Mira started to turn away, then paused, her gaze dropping to Mrs. Delacroix's hands. The nanny had pressed her right arm against the doorframe, partially hidden in shadow. But the hallway sconce caught the edge of something silver beneath her wrist, a glint of metal tucked under her uniform cuff. Is that a bracelet? Mira asked, keeping her tone innocent, curious. Mrs. Delacroix's left hand moved instinctively to cover her right wrist. Medical alert band. None of your concern. But Mira had seen it. Not a bracelet. Not a medical band. A small implement, thin and precise, held in place by an elastic strap. The kind of tool that could make very controlled, very careful cuts. The kind of tool that could harvest hair samples from a sleeping baby without waking her. Of course. Sorry to disturb you, Mira backed away, offering a small, apologetic smile. Mrs. Delacroix watched her retreat down the hallway, her eyes cold and calculating. Only when Mira turned the corner did the nursery door finally close. Mira didn't go back to the laundry room. She went straight to her quarters, a small room barely larger than a closet, with a single bed and a dresser. She locked the door and sat on the edge of the mattress, her whole body shaking. She'd interrupted something. And from the look on Mrs. Delacroix's face, the nanny knew she'd been caught, which meant Mira was now a problem. And problems in Alessandro Leonetti's house didn't last long. Mira didn't sleep. She sat on her bed fully clothed, door locked, listening to every creak and footstep in the mansion's bones. At 5:30 a.m., she finally emerged, exhausted but wired on adrenaline, and went to start her morning duties. The mansion was coming alive. Kitchen staff preparing breakfast, security changing shifts, cleaners beginning their rounds. Everything normal. Everything fine. Except Mrs. Delacroix watched her from across the dining room with eyes like a hawk tracking prey. Mira kept her head down, polishing silver in the butler's pantry, staying visible and busy. The safest thing was to blend in, to seem harmless. But her mind kept circling back to that silver implement under the nanny's sleeve, to the carefully shaved hair strands, to Valentina's weak little body. At 6:45 a.m., Alessandro's voice boomed from upstairs. Not again. Mira abandoned the silver and ran toward the nursery with the other staff. They clustered in the hallway as Alessandro emerged, Valentina limp in his arms, her skin even paler than yesterday. She was fine 3 hours ago. Alessandro snarled at Mrs. Delacroix. I checked her myself, at 4 a.m. She was sleeping normally. Now look at her. The nanny's face was a mask of concern. Sir, I don't understand. She's been sleeping peacefully all night. I checked on her every hour, just as you instructed. Then, why is she worse? Dr. Hamish arrived within 20 minutes, summoned from his home. He examined Valentina in the nursery while Alessandro paced the hallway like a caged animal. Mira stayed back, trying to remain invisible, but she caught Mrs. Delacroix staring at her twice. The second time, the nanny's expression held something new.
Fear.
It's baffling, Dr. Hamish admitted when he emerged. Her vitals are weak again, but there's no medical explanation. No fever, no infection, no neurological issues. It's as if something is draining her energy, but I can't find the source. Then find it, Alessandro said, his voice deadly quiet. I don't care what it costs. I want specialists from every field. I want tests for everything, toxins, allergies, genetic disorders, everything. Of course, Mr. Leonetti. As the doctor left, Alessandro turned to his assembled staff. No one enters the nursery except Dr. Hamish and Mrs. Delacroix. Is that clear? No 1 inch. Everyone nodded. Mira felt the exclusion like a physical blow, but she understood. He was protecting his daughter the only way he knew how, by controlling access, by limiting variables. He just didn't realize the threat was already inside the circle of trust. The day dragged. Mira cleaned guest rooms on the 3rd floor, far from Valentina, her mind spinning useless plans. She needed proof, but how? She'd been banned from the nursery. Mrs. Delacroix would be more careful now. And if Mira made one wrong move, she'd be fired or worse. At 11 p.m., exhausted, she returned to her room. At 2:15 a.m., a sound woke her. Footsteps in the hallway outside her door, slow and deliberate. They stopped directly outside her room. Mira held her breath, staring at the locked door handle. It turned.
Locked.
Thank God. The footsteps retreated. Mira waited 5 full minutes before creeping to her door and pressing her ear against it. Silence. She cracked it open and peered into the dim hallway. Empty. But her instincts screamed danger. She grabbed her phone and slipped into the corridor, moving on bare feet toward the servants' stairs. If someone was checking on her, they'd expect her to stay in her room like a good, frightened employee. Instead, she went up. The 2nd floor was quiet, illuminated only by emergency lighting. Mira made her way toward the nursery, staying close to the walls, avoiding the cameras she knew monitored the main hallway. There, the linen closet. She slipped inside again, pulling the door nearly closed. At 3:15 a.m., right on schedule, Mrs. Delacroix appeared. The nanny moved with the same careful silence, key already in hand. But this time, before she could enter the nursery, another figure emerged from the shadows at the opposite end of the hallway.
Alessandro.
Mrs. Delacroix froze, her hand on the nursery door. Mr. Leonetti, I was just checking on Valentina. At 3 a.m? He approached slowly, his footsteps echoing. I told you to check every hour. You checked it too. Why are you back? I thought I heard her fussing. Mrs. Delacroix's voice remained steady, but Mira saw her right hand drop to her side, fingers flexing near her wrist. Near where that silver tool would be. Alessandro's eyes narrowed. I've been sitting in the room across the hall for the past hour. She hasn't made a sound. The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. You're checking on me, Mrs. Delacroix said softly. You don't trust me anymore? Should I? I have served your family for 6 years, Mr. Leonetti. I was there when Valentina was born. I held her before you did. Her voice cracked with emotion. That girl, that maid, she's been here less than a week and she's turned you against me. She's clumsy, she's careless, and she keeps invading my duties, interfering with the baby's care. Mira hasn't been near the nursery in 2 days. Because I've been protecting Valentina from her. Tears spilled down Mrs. Delacroix's cheeks. Real tears. Mira watched, stunned. The nanny's breakdown looked completely genuine. The trembling hands, the choked voice, the desperate grief of a woman wrongly accused. Alessandro's expression softened slightly, uncertainty creeping in. Please, sir, Mrs. Delacroix whispered. Don't let paranoia destroy what we've built. Your daughter needs stability. She needs people who love her, not suspicious strangers who see conspiracies in everything. Alessandro was silent for a long moment. Then, both of you are suspended from nursery duty until further notice. I'll hire new staff tomorrow. What? If there's drama, I remove the source. Both sources, he turned toward his own room. Touch that door again tonight, and you're fired. That goes for everyone. He disappeared into the darkness. Mrs. Delacroix stood frozen, tears still streaming, but her face had gone blank. Empty. Then she turned and looked directly at the linen closet. Directly at where Mira was hiding. She smiled. Mira didn't move. Couldn't move. Mrs. Delacroix's smile was razor-thin, knowing, and it pinned Mira in place like a butterfly on a board. Then the nanny turned and walked away, her footsteps fading into silence. Mira waited 20 minutes before emerging, her legs stiff and her heart still hammering. She made it back to her room without incident, but sleep was impossible. She sat on her bed until dawn, replaying that smile over and over. Mrs. Delacroix knew Mira had been watching, which meant Myra's usefulness as a covert observer was over. Now it was just a matter of who reached Alessandro first with a convincing story. At 7 a.m., Mira made her decision. She found Alessandro in his office, a massive room of dark wood and leather, walls lined with books that probably cost more than most people's cars. He sat behind an ornate desk, phone pressed to his ear, conducting business in rapid Italian. When he saw Mira in the doorway, his eyes hardened. He ended the call. "You're not supposed to be on this floor." "I need 5 minutes, Mr. Leonetti. Please." "I don't have 5 minutes. Your daughter is being hurt deliberately, and I can prove it." The words hung in the air. Alessandro's hand tightened on the phone, his jaw working. Then he set it down carefully. "Close the door." Mira stepped inside and shut the door behind her. The office suddenly felt very small, the air thick with tension. Alessandro gestured to the chair across from his desk.
Seat. Talk.
"And understand that if you're wasting my time with paranoid theories, you'll regret it." Mira sat, forcing her voice to stay calm and steady. 3 nights ago, I found scratches on Valentina's head. Yesterday, I was doing laundry and found strands of her hair, shaved, not pulled, cut with something extremely sharp and precise. Babies can scratch themselves. Her nails were trimmed. The scratches were too uniform, too deliberate. Mira leaned forward. "Last night, I saw Mrs. Delacroix enter the nursery at 3:27 a.m. When I interrupted her, I saw a tool strapped to her wrist, a small silver implement, like a razor. Tonight, she came back at 3:15 a.m. and you caught her." Alessandro's expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Delacroix has been with this family for 6 years. I know. She was my wife's personal choice. Maria trusted her completely. I know that too. And you've been here 1 week." Mira held his gaze. "Yes." Silence. Alessandro stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the morning sun illuminated the mansion's grounds, acres of manicured lawns, a maze garden, a fountain imported from Rome. A kingdom built on power and control. "Do you understand what you're accusing her of?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "You're saying she's been harming my daughter. Intentionally. Repeatedly. With no motive, no reason." "I don't know the motive yet," Mira admitted. "But I know what I saw." "What you saw was a dedicated nanny checking on a baby in the middle of the night. What you saw was a medical alert bracelet, which she explained. What you saw is filtered through inexperience and an overactive imagination." "Then explain why Valentina keeps getting weaker." "The doctors are investigating." "The doctors found nothing because there's nothing to find medically." Mira stood, unable to stay seated any longer. "Mr. Leonetti, I've worked with vulnerable people my whole career. Elderly patients, disabled adults, children. I know what abuse looks like. I know how people hide it. And I know that the ones who seem most devoted, most trustworthy, are often the most dangerous because no one suspects them." Alessandro turned from the window, his eyes blazing. "You know nothing about my family. Nothing about what's at stake here. Then tell me." The words came out before Mira could stop them. Alessandro stared at her, and for a moment she thought he might throw her out, or worse. Instead, he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You want the truth? Fine." He moved back to his desk, bracing his hands on it. "My daughter isn't just my daughter. She's the key to a peace treaty between 5 families who've been at war for 3 generations. Her birth, Maria's pregnancy, was what finally convinced the old bosses that I was serious about building something stable. A legacy. Myra's stomach sank. So, if something's wrong with Valentina, if there's even a rumor that she's sick, weak, defective, the alliance fractures. The families pull back. Territories I've spent 10 years consolidating will be up for grabs within a month. Blood will run in the streets. He looked at her with something that might have been desperation. Do you understand now? I can't afford for my daughter to be anything less than perfect. And I certainly can't afford paranoid accusations against trusted staff that make us look unstable from the inside. The pieces clicked into place. So you'd rather ignore the possibility that she's being hurt than risk looking weak. I'd rather follow evidence and expert advice than the conspiracy theories of a maid I hired last week. Then why are you still listening to me? The question hung between them. Alessandro straightened, his face hardening back into the mask of the untouchable Mafia boss. Because despite everything, you don't seem stupid or malicious. Just naive. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back to your duties. You're going to stay away from the nursery, away from Mrs. Delacroix, and away from my daughter. And if Valentina's condition changes, better or worse, we'll know it has nothing to do with you or your theories. And if I'm right, then you'll have saved my daughter's life, and I'll owe you everything. He sat down, picking up his phone. But if you're wrong, if you cause trouble based on nothing, then you'll learn why people fear the Leonetti name. We're done here. It was a dismissal. Mira stood, her mind racing. She'd played her hand and gained nothing. Alessandro was too trapped by politics and power to act on uncertainty. He needed absolute proof, and she had none that would satisfy him. As she reached the door, he spoke again. Mira. She turned. For what it's worth, I hope you're wrong. So do I, Mr. Leonetti. But as she left the office, she knew with cold certainty that she wasn't wrong. And now she had 48 hours, maybe less, to prove it before Mrs. Delacroix made her next move. Against Valentina. Or against Mira herself. The next morning, Alessandro made an unexpected call. Mira heard about it from the kitchen staff. The house was buzzing with gossip. Mr. Leonetti had summoned his personal barber, Vincent Romano, a wizened Italian man in his 70s who'd been cutting the Leonetti men's hair for 40 years. Vincent arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, carrying his leather tool case, his face creased with confusion. For a baby? He'd apparently said in the foyer. Why would you need a barber for a baby? Mira was cleaning the second-floor hallway when Alessandro emerged from his study with Vincent in tow. Mrs. Delacroix stood near the nursery door, her posture rigid, her face carefully neutral. You want me to examine her scalp? Vincent was asking, his thick accent turning the words musical. Mr. Leonetti, I'm not a doctor. I don't need a doctor. I need someone who understands hair, skin, cutting patterns. Someone I trust. Alessandro's tone left no room for argument. They entered the nursery. Mrs. Delacroix started to follow, but Alessandro held up a hand. Wait here. The nanny's mask slipped for just a second, a flash of panic, quickly suppressed. Sir, I should be present if someone is handling Valentina. I said wait here.
The door closed.
Mira slowed her dusting, staying within earshot. Mrs. Delacroix remained frozen by the door, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. 2 other staff members passed through. A cook bringing tea service to the study, a groundskeeper reporting on the irrigation system, and the nanny didn't acknowledge either of them. Her entire focus was on that closed door. 15 minutes passed.
20.
Then the door opened. Vincent emerged first, his face troubled. Alessandro followed, carrying Valentina. The baby was awake but listless, her head resting against her father's shoulder. Mrs. Delacroix, Alessandro said, his voice carefully controlled. Vincent has found something interesting. The nanny's professional smile appeared instantly. Oh, what is it? Vincent set his tool case down and pulled out a magnifying glass. May I? He gestured to Valentina. Alessandro turned so the barber could access the baby's head. Vincent gently parted the fine dark hair at the crown, holding the magnifying glass steady. You see here? And here? These are not scratches from fingernails. These are trauma marks, repetitive, symmetrical, deliberate. Mrs. Delacroix leaned in, her expression concerned. I don't understand. What kind of trauma? The kind made by a very sharp blade, used with precision over multiple sessions. Vincent's voice was matter-of-fact. I've been cutting hair for 53 years. I know what accidental injury looks like. This is not accidental. The hallway went silent. Mira stopped pretending to dust and simply watched. That's impossible, Mrs. Delacroix said. I'm with Valentina constantly. No one has been cutting her hair. Someone has. Vincent packed away his magnifying glass. Multiple times. Small sections, carefully removed. The pattern suggests someone harvesting samples. Harvesting. Alessandro's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. For what purpose? That I cannot tell you. But I can tell you this. Whoever did this knows what they're doing. The cuts are clean, precise, professional. Alessandro's gaze swept the hallway, landing on each staff member present. The cook, the groundskeeper, Mira. Then, finally, Mrs. Delacroix. The nanny met his eyes without flinching. Mr. Leonetti, I swear to you, I have no idea how this happened. But we need to investigate every person who has access to Valentina. Every single person. She glanced at Mira. Including those who've been sneaking around at night. Myra's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to stay quiet. Alessandro handed Valentina to Vincent. Hold her for a moment, then he turned to his head of security, a thick-necked man named Frank who'd appeared from the shadows. Lock down the mansion. No one in, no one out. 72 hours. Sir? Mrs. Delacroix's voice rose slightly. A full lockdown? Is that really necessary? Someone in this house has been cutting my daughter's hair while she sleeps. Someone has been making her sick, weak, deliberately. His words were ice. So yes, Mrs. Delacroix. It's necessary. Until I find out who and why, everyone stays. Frank nodded and pulled out his radio, barking orders. Within minutes, Mira heard the electronic locks engaging throughout the mansion, the exterior gates closing, the security protocols activating. They were all trapped inside. Alessandro took Valentina back from Vincent. Thank you, old friend. Your room is prepared on the 3rd floor. You'll stay until this is resolved. Vincent bowed slightly. Of course. As the barber left, Alessandro addressed the remaining staff. Go about your normal duties. But understand, I will be watching. And when I find who did this, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone scattered. Everyone except Mrs. Delacroix, who remained by the nursery door. Mr. Leonetti, she said softly. I would never hurt Valentina. Surely you know that. I thought I knew a lot of things. He studied her face. My wife trusted you. I trusted you. But trust doesn't explain those marks on my daughter's head. I understand your anger. But please, don't let suspicion destroy years of loyalty. Mrs. Delacroix's voice trembled. I loved Maria. I love Valentina. They're family to me. Alessandro said nothing. He simply turned and carried his daughter back into the nursery, closing the door between them. Mrs. Delacroix stood alone in the hallway for a long moment. Then her gaze found Mira, still standing near the window, with her cleaning supplies. The nanny's expression was no longer afraid. It was cold, calculating. And Mira realized with creeping dread that a 72-hour lockdown meant something else too. She was trapped in a mansion with a woman who now had nothing to lose. And 3 days was a long time for accidents to happen. The convoy left at dawn the next morning, 3 black SUVs cutting through fresh snowfall toward Alessandro's lake house 2 hours north. Only 5 people made the trip. Alessandro, Valentina, Mrs. Delacroix, Mira, and Frank, the head of security. Alessandro had made the decision at midnight. If someone in the mansion is responsible, distance will expose them, he'd announced. And if the problem follows us to the lake house, then I know it's one of the 5 traveling. Mrs. Delacroix had smiled when he said it. A small, private smile that Mira saw and didn't like. Now Mira sat in the 3rd SUV with Frank, watching the city disappear behind them. The lake house was supposed to be a sanctuary, isolated, secure, impossible to breach. But Mira couldn't shake the feeling they were driving into a trap instead of escaping one. The property was stunning. The house sat on a cliff overlooking a frozen lake, surrounded by snow-covered pines. Modern glass and timber construction, all clean lines and expensive minimalism. Inside, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the winter landscape like a painting. Beautiful, isn't it? Mrs. Delacroix said, appearing beside Mira as she stood in the living room. Mr. Leonetti's wife designed this place. She had excellent taste. Mira didn't respond. She'd been avoiding direct conversation with the nanny since the lockdown began. Mrs. Delacroix moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think you're clever, don't you? Playing detective, whispering in his ear. But you're out of your depth, girl. These people, this world, you don't understand what you're interfering with. I understand that a baby is being hurt. You understand nothing. Mrs. Delacroix's eyes were flat, emotionless. But you'll learn. Soon enough. She walked away, leaving Mira cold despite the roaring fireplace. The first night at the lake house was quiet. Alessandro kept Valentina in his room, refusing to let her out of his sight. Mrs. Delacroix maintained her duties with professional efficiency, preparing bottles, organizing the baby's things, acting as if nothing had changed. Mira was assigned a small room on the second floor, next to the guest bathroom. She lay awake until 3 a.m., listening to every creak and groan of the unfamiliar house, before finally drifting into uneasy sleep. At 6:30 a.m., Alessandro's roar shattered the morning silence. Mira bolted from her room and ran downstairs. Alessandro stood in the master bedroom doorway, Valentina limp in his arms. The baby's skin had taken on a grayish tinge, her breathing shallow and labored. She was fine at 4 a.m., Alessandro said, his voice shaking, not with anger this time, but fear. I checked her. She was sleeping normally.
Fine.
How is she worse again? Mrs. Delacroix rushed over, her face a mask of concern. Let me see her. Don't touch her. Alessandro pulled Valentina closer.
Mira. Now.
Mira approached, her heart hammering. Alessandro tilted Valentina's head toward her.
Check.
Check for marks. She gently parted the baby's hair with trembling fingers. There, at the crown, partially hidden by surrounding hair, fresh cuts. 3 parallel lines, identical to the previous ones. New cuts, Mira whispered.
Fresh.
Probably made within the last 2 hours. The words fell like stones. Alessandro's face went white, then red. There are only 5 people in this house.
5.
Which means... it's her. Mrs. Delacroix pointed at Mira, her voice breaking. She's been obsessed with the baby since she arrived. She's the only one who keeps finding these supposed marks. Maybe she's creating them. I haven't been near Valentina since we arrived. You have a room on the second floor. The master bedroom is on the second floor. You could easily. Enough. Alessandro's voice cut through the argument like a blade. He turned to Frank. Pull the security footage. Every camera, every angle. I want to see who moved through this house between 4 and 6 a.m. Frank nodded and disappeared toward the security office. They waited in terrible silence. Mrs. Delacroix stood by the window, her arms crossed. Mira remained near Alessandro, watching Valentina's shallow breathing. The baby's eyes were barely open, unfocused. She's dying, Mira thought with sudden, terrible clarity. Whatever this is, it's getting worse. Frank returned 15 minutes later, his face grim. Sir, you need to see this. They gathered in the small security office. Frank pulled up footage from the second floor hallway camera, timestamp 4:47 a.m. The hallway was empty, illuminated only by emergency lighting. Then a door opened. Not Myra's room, but the guest room where Mrs. Delacroix was staying. Except it wasn't Mrs. Delacroix who emerged. It was a man. Tall, lean, moving with practiced silence toward the master bedroom. Alessandro leaned closer to the screen. Who the hell? Keep watching, Frank said. The figure paused outside the master bedroom, produced something from his pocket, a key, and slipped inside. 15 minutes later, he emerged and returned to Mrs. Delacroix's room. "There's only 5 of us here," Mira said slowly. "Alessandro, Valentina, Mrs. Delacroix, Frank, and me. That's not any of us." "It's a 6th person," Frank confirmed. "Someone who was already in the house when we arrived." Alessandro's hands curled into fists. Mrs. Delacroix's room.
Now.
They stormed upstairs. Alessandro didn't knock. He kicked the door open. The room was empty. Bed made, curtains drawn. No sign of occupancy. But when Frank checked the closet, he found a sleeping bag, protein bars, bottles of water. Evidence of someone living there secretly. And on the nightstand, partially hidden under a lamp, was a medical vial labeled in neat handwriting. V. Leonetti, Sample 7. Inside was a small amount of blood. Valentina's blood. Alessandro picked up the vial with shaking hands, and Mira saw something she'd never seen before in the Mafia boss's face.
Pure un'adulterated terror.
"This isn't about hurting her," he whispered. "This is about proving she isn't mine." Frank and his men tore through the lake house like a hurricane. Every closet, every crawl space, every potential hiding spot. The mysterious 6th person was gone, vanished into the snow-covered woods, leaving only footprints that disappeared at the tree line. Alessandro stood in the living room, holding the vial of blood like it was a live grenade. Valentina slept fitfully in a portable crib nearby, her breathing still shallow but stable. "DNA theft," he said quietly. "They've been collecting samples. Hair follicles, blood, skin cells. Building a case to challenge her legitimacy." "But why make her sick?" Mira asked. "If they just wanted DNA." "Because sick children require medical intervention. Blood draws. Tissue samples. More opportunities to collect evidence." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "And if she's perceived as weak, sickly, it supports the narrative that she's not really Leonetti blood. That Maria was unfaithful. That I'm raising another man's child. That's insane. Anyone can see she looks like you. In our world, resemblance means nothing. DNA is everything." He set the vial down carefully. "If someone challenges her legitimacy with genetic proof, real or fabricated, the alliance collapses. I'm left with a bastard child and no heir. The families divide the territories. Everything I've built turns to ash." Mira looked at Mrs. Delacroix, who stood near the window, her face unreadable. "She brought someone into your house. Into the nursery." "No," Mrs. Delacroix said softly. "I didn't bring anyone. I don't know who that man is. Your room is a guest room. Anyone could have hidden there." Her voice was steady, controlled. "Mr. Leonetti, I have served your family faithfully. I would never." "Enough," Alessandro's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then answered. "What?" Mira watched his face change as he listened. His expression went from anger to confusion to cold, deadly focus. "Say that again," he said into the phone. A pause. "You're certain?"
I see. Yes. Lock it down.
"No one touches anything." He ended the call and looked at Frank. That was the mansion security. They found something in Mrs. Delacroix's quarters. A burner phone, hidden in the bathroom ceiling. Mrs. Delacroix's face went pale. "That's not mine. It has exactly 12 outgoing calls over the past 3 weeks. All to the same number." Alessandro's voice was ice. A number registered to Marco Leonetti. The name hung in the air like poison.
Marco.
Alessandro's cousin. A man Mira had never met but had heard the kitchen staff whisper about. Passed over for leadership when Alessandro took control. Bitter, ambitious, always scheming. "Marco is in Sicily," Mrs. Delacroix said quickly. "He's been there for months." "He's been in New York for 6 weeks." Alessandro stepped closer to her. "My people just confirmed it. He's staying at the Meridian under a false name. And apparently, he's been receiving regular updates from someone in my household." "No," Mrs. Delacroix shook her head. "No, this is a setup. Someone planted that phone. The call started 3 weeks ago. The same time Valentina started getting sick." Myra's mind raced. She's been reporting to Marco, telling him when to send his man, when you'd be distracted, when the baby would be alone. I would never. Shut up, Alessandro's voice cracked like a whip. You don't speak unless I ask you a question. Understood? Mrs. Delacroix's mouth snapped shut. For the first time since Mira had met her, the nanny looked genuinely afraid. Alessandro pulled out his own phone and dialed. It rang twice before someone answered. Cousin, Alessandro said, his tone conversational, almost friendly. We need to talk. Mira couldn't hear the response, but she saw Alessandro's expression darken. Yes, I'm at the lake house. And I've just discovered something very interesting about my daughter's illness. He walked to the window, looking out at the frozen lake. Tell me, Marco, what are you planning to do with the DNA samples? A longer pause. Then Alessandro laughed, a sound without humor, a legitimacy challenge. Of course. Present fabricated evidence that Maria was unfaithful, that Valentina isn't my blood, that the alliance was built on a lie. He turned back to face the room. And once the families reject her, once they reject me, who would they turn to? The next male Leonetti in line. You. Mira couldn't hear Marco's response, but she could imagine it. Denials, justifications, accusations. Here's what I don't understand, Alessandro continued. You had to know I'd find out eventually. I always find out. So, either you're stupider than I thought, or... He trailed off, his eyes widening slightly. Or you wanted me to find out. You wanted the chaos. Because the accusation alone is enough, isn't it? Even if I prove Valentina is mine, the doubt remains. The families start wondering. The alliance weakens. And in the chaos, you make your move. A voice crackled through the phone, louder now. Angry. Alessandro listened, his face unreadable. Then, you're right about one thing, Marco. The family does need strong leadership. But you made one critical mistake. What's that? You assumed I wouldn't burn everything to the ground to protect my daughter. Alessandro's voice dropped to a whisper. You assumed wrong. He ended the call. The room was silent. Frank stood ready, hand near his concealed weapon. Mrs. Delacroix had sunk into a chair, her face in her hands. Mira remained frozen, afraid to even breathe wrong. Frank, Alessandro said calmly. Call the family heads. All of them. Emergency council. Tomorrow night, Manhattan. Tell them I'm exposing a traitor and they need to witness the resolution. Yes, sir. Alessandro picked up Valentina from the crib, cradling her against his chest. Mrs. Delacroix, you're going to tell me everything. Every conversation with Marco, every instruction he gave you, every sample his man collected. And if you cooperate fully, I might let you live. The nanny looked up, tears streaming down her face. He said Valentina wasn't the right heir. That the family needed strength, not an infant. That you'd gone soft since Maria died. He promised me. I don't care what he promised.
Talk. Now.
And she did. Mrs. Delacroix talked for 2 hours straight. She told them everything. How Marco had approached her 6 months after Maria's death, exploiting her grief and financial desperation. Her daughter in Boston needed surgery, experimental treatment not covered by insurance. Marco had offered $200,000. All she had to do was help collect DNA samples and report on Alessandro's movements. The man in the footage, Alessandro said, his voice dangerously quiet. Who is he? I don't know his real name. Marco called him the specialist. He's a medical technician, I think. He knew how to extract samples without leaving obvious marks. Mrs. Delacroix wiped her eyes. I gave him access. Let him hide in my room when you brought the baby here. I thought it was just about DNA. I didn't know he was making her sick. You didn't ask. Alessandro's contempt was palpable. You just took the money. My daughter was dying. So, you helped kill mine? The words hung like an executioner's blade. Mrs. Delacroix crumpled, sobbing. Mira watched, feeling a strange mixture of pity and revulsion. The nanny was a victim of Marco's manipulation, yes. But she'd still chosen to betray a helpless child. Alessandro handed Valentina to Mira. Watch her. Don't let her out of your sight. Then he dragged Mrs. Delacroix into the study and slammed the door. Mira stood alone in the living room, holding the baby. Valentina's eyes were open now, more alert than she'd been in days. Without the nightly treatments, her body was already beginning to recover. "You're going to be okay," Mira whispered. "I promise." Frank appeared from the security office. "The specialist is gone. Disappeared into the woods, probably had a vehicle stashed. We'll find him, but it'll take time." "What about the DNA samples he collected?" "That's the problem. We don't know where they are. Could be with Marco, could be in a lab somewhere, could be already presented to someone in the families." Frank's expression was grim. "The accusation is out there now, even if we stop Marco. That's the real damage." Mira looked down at Valentina. "Can Alessandro just do a paternity test? Prove she's his?"
He will.
But mud sticks. There'll always be people who say the test was rigged, that Leonetti money bought the results. In this world, suspicion is as deadly as proof. The study door opened. Alessandro emerged, his knuckles bruised. Mrs. Delacroix was no longer crying. She sat motionless, staring at nothing. "Frank, take her to the basement. Keep her there until I decide what to do with her." Alessandro's voice was empty of emotion. "And call her people in Boston. Find out if she actually has a daughter and if the daughter actually needed surgery. I want to know if she was desperate or just greedy." "Yes, sir." As Frank led Mrs. Delacroix away, Alessandro approached Mira. For a moment, he just looked at his daughter, something broken and vulnerable crossing his face. "You were right," he said quietly. "From the beginning, you were right. I didn't listen. You were trying to protect her." "I was trying to protect my empire." He reached out, gently touching Valentina's cheek. "I prioritized politics over her safety. That's unforgivable." Mira wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. "What happens now?" she asked instead. "Now I prove she's mine. And then I end Marco." He looked at Mira. "But I need evidence. Real, incontrovertible proof that he orchestrated this. Mrs. Delacroix's testimony isn't enough. She's compromised. The families will say, I coerced her. I need something objective. Something they can't dismiss." "The specialist," Mira said slowly. "He's the key. If you find him, he's a ghost. Professional. He'll be out of the country by tomorrow." They stood in silence. Then an idea struck Mira, crazy and desperate. "My room," she said suddenly. "I have something. Maybe. I don't know if it'll help." She ran upstairs, still carrying Valentina, and burst into her bedroom. Her small suitcase sat in the corner, the one she'd packed in a hurry when she took this job, throwing in everything from her old apartment, including the spy camera. Her mother had given it to her years ago when Mira worked night shifts at the nursing home. "For your safety," her mom had said. "You never know who's watching, so you watch back." It was old, cheap, bought from some catalog. But it worked. Mira had used it to monitor elderly patients who were prone to falling, to document abuse she'd reported to management, to protect herself from false accusations. She'd brought it to the Leonetti mansion without thinking. And 2 nights ago, when she'd been desperate and frightened and out of options, she'd placed it on the shelf above Valentina's crib. Mira pulled the camera from her suitcase and checked the memory card. Still there. Still recording. She rushed back downstairs. "Mr. Leonetti, I think I have something." He looked up sharply. "What?" 2 nights ago, before we left for the lake house, I placed a camera in the nursery. Hidden. I was trying to catch whoever was hurting Valentina, but I didn't know if it would work, so I didn't say anything. She held out the camera, her hands shaking. There might be footage of the specialist actually doing it. Alessandro took the camera like it was made of gold. "Frank, get over here. I need this on a screen."
Now.
They huddled around Frank's laptop in the security office. He connected the camera and pulled up the files. Hours of footage, most of it dark and grainy. Then, at 2:47 a.m. 2 nights ago, movement. The nursery door opened. A figure entered, tall and lean, wearing surgical gloves. He moved to the crib with practiced efficiency, producing a small leather case from his pocket. The camera caught everything. Him gently lifting Valentina's head, using what looked like a micro-razor to scrape her scalp, collecting hair follicles in a vial, using a tiny lancet to prick her finger, drawing a few drops of blood into a second vial, and then, most damningly, using a syringe to inject something into the baby's arm, something that made her body go limp and lifeless. He was drugging her, Mira breathed. That's why she kept getting weak. Not just trauma from the samples. He was sedating her. Alessandro's face was carved from stone. Can you identify him from this? Frank zoomed in on the man's face. Even in the dim nursery light, his features were clear enough. I can work with this, Frank said. Run it through facial recognition, send it to our contacts. If he's ever been arrested, worked in any hospital, has any paper trail, we'll find him.
Alessandro nodded slowly.
Then he looked at Mira. You planted surveillance in my daughter's nursery. Yes. Without permission. Without telling anyone. Yes. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile, not the calculated expressions she'd seen before. You just saved both our lives. You understand that. Mira understood. Without this evidence, it would be Alessandro's word against Marco's. A family divided, a war inevitable. With this evidence, they had a chance. They returned to Manhattan the next morning. Alessandro drove himself, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching back to check on Valentina in her car seat. Mira sat beside him, exhausted, while Frank followed in the second SUV, with Mrs. Delacroix secured in the back. The city rose before them like a fortress of steel and glass. Alessandro had been making calls the entire drive, quiet, clipped conversations in Italian and English, arranging meetings,
Calling in debts.
preparing for war. The family council meets tonight at 8, he said as they crossed into the city limits. 5 heads, representing the major territories. They'll want to see evidence. They'll want to hear testimony. And they'll want blood. Marco's blood. Depends on what I can prove, Alessandro's jaw tightened. If I can't definitively show he orchestrated this, if there's any room for doubt, they'll call for a vote. Force me to share power or step down entirely. That's what Marco's counting on. Even if he falls, I fall with him. But you have the video. Of a man we can't identify yet. Frank's people are working on it, but facial recognition takes time. We might have a name by tonight, or we might not, he glanced at her. That's why I need you there. Myra's stomach dropped. At the council meeting? You're the one who found the evidence. You're the witness who saw Mrs. Delacroix with the razor, who discovered the hair samples, who placed the camera. Your testimony matters. I'm a maid. Why would they listen to me? Because you have no reason to lie. You're not family, not invested in the politics. You're just someone who protected a child, Alessandro's voice softened. That makes you more credible than anyone else in this mess. They arrived at the Leonetti building, a luxury apartment tower in Midtown that served as both Alessandro's home and his base of operations. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor, a sprawling space of modern elegance and old-world power. Mira was shown to a guest room to rest and clean up. Someone had already brought her suitcase from the mansion. She showered, changed into clean clothes, and tried to quiet her racing mind. At 7:30 p.m., Alessandro knocked on her door. He wore a tailored black suit, his hair perfectly styled, every inch the powerful boss. But his eyes were tired, carrying the weight of what was coming. It's time, he said. The council met in a private restaurant Alessandro owned, closed to the public, security posted at every entrance. Mira walked beside Alessandro, who carried Valentina in his arms. The baby was awake, looking around with curious eyes, her color finally healthy, her strength returning. Inside, 5 men waited at a long table, all of them older than Alessandro, ranging from their 50s to their 70s. Men with hard faces and expensive suits, men who'd built their power on violence and strategy. And at the far end of the table sat Marco Leonetti. He was younger than Alessandro by 5 years, handsome in a polished way, with slicked back hair and a confident smile. When he saw them enter, his smile widened. "Cousin," Marco said warmly. "Thank you for calling this meeting. I was beginning to think you'd avoid me forever." Alessandro said nothing. He sat at the head of the table, positioning Valentina's carrier beside him. Mira stood against the wall with Frank, trying to be invisible. One of the older men, white-haired, with a scar across his cheek, spoke first. "Alessandro, you said this was urgent, that there was a traitor in your organization. We're listening." "Thank you, Vincent." Alessandro's voice was calm, measured. 3 weeks ago, my daughter began showing signs of illness. Weakness, lethargy, unexplained trauma to her scalp. My doctors found nothing, but someone in my household noticed things the doctors missed. He gestured to Mira. She stepped forward, her heart hammering. "Tell them what you found," Alessandro said. Mira took a breath and explained everything: the scratches, the shaved hair, the late-night visits, the hidden razor. The council members listened impassively, their faces unreadable. When she finished, Marco laughed. "This is your evidence? The observations of a maid who's been employed for, what, 2 weeks? Alessandro, this is beneath you." "I'm not finished." Alessandro pulled out a laptop and opened the video file. "This footage was recorded in my daughter's nursery 2 nights ago." He played the video. The room went silent as they watched the specialist enter, extract samples, inject Valentina with sedatives. The footage was damning, undeniable. When it ended, Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Who is that man?" "A medical technician named David Reese," Frank said, stepping forward. "Worked at 3 different hospitals in New York and New Jersey before being fired for selling patient information. My people identified him 4 hours ago. He's currently being held at one of our secure locations." "And what does this have to do with Marco?" another council member asked. Alessandro turned to his cousin. "Would you like to tell them, or should I?" Marco's smile had frozen. "I have no idea what you're talking about. David Reese made 17 calls to a burner phone registered under your false name. He withdrew $150,000 from an account you control. And my head nanny, the woman who gave him access, has provided a full confession implicating you in a plot to challenge my daughter's legitimacy. A coerced confession from a disgruntled employee. She passed a polygraph 2 hours ago." The words hit like a bomb. Marco's face went pale. "You paid her to help collect DNA samples," Alessandro continued. "Your plan was to fabricate evidence that Valentina isn't my biological daughter, that Maria was unfaithful, that the alliance was built on a lie. And once the families rejected her, rejected me, you'd position yourself as the rightful Leonetti heir. That's insane." "Is it?" Alessandro pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Marco's voice, distorted but recognizable, discussing the plan with Mrs. Delacroix. Times, dates, payment schedules. "You recorded me?" Marco's composure finally cracked. "You can't. That's not admissible. This isn't a court of law, cousin. This is family." Alessandro stood. "You tried to destroy my daughter to steal my position. You endangered a child. An infant. Your own blood." Vincent cleared his throat. "Alessandro, what are you asking for?" The room went deadly quiet. Alessandro looked at Marco, and Mira saw something terrible in his eyes. Not rage, not hatred, just cold, final judgment. "I'm asking for nothing," Alessandro said quietly. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. Marco is stripped of rank, assets, and family name. He's exiled. And if he ever sets foot in my territory again, he dies. No trial.
No merci."
"You can't," Marco started. "I can. And I am." Alessandro turned to the council. "Does anyone object?" The 5 men looked at each other. Then one by one they shook their heads. "The Leonetti line must be preserved," Vincent said. "What Marco did threatens us all. Your judgment is appropriate." Marco shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. "This is a coup. He's consolidating power, eliminating rivals." "You're not a rival," Alessandro said softly. You're a traitor. There's a difference. Two security guards appeared from the shadows, flanking Marco. He looked around wildly, searching for allies, for mercy, for escape. He found none. You'll regret this, Marco hissed as they dragged him toward the exit. The families need strength, Alessandro. Not sentiment. Not a man who goes soft over a baby. That baby is the only reason you're leaving here alive. Alessandro's voice could have cut glass. Remember that. Every day of your exile, remember that my daughter's life bought yours. Marco was gone. The door closed behind him. The council members stood, offering formal nods to Alessandro. The crisis was over. Order restored. But as they filed out, Vincent paused beside Alessandro. You handled this well. But the accusation still exists. People will talk. Let them talk. I'll have DNA results by the end of the week. Make them public. Every family needs to see them. Vincent's gaze dropped to Valentina. She's a beautiful child, worth protecting. Yes, Alessandro said quietly. She is. When everyone had left except Frank and Mira, Alessandro finally allowed himself to slump in his chair. He pulled Valentina from her carrier and held her close, his forehead resting against hers. It's over, he whispered. You're safe now. I promise. You're safe. Mira watched father and daughter and felt something break open in her chest. Relief. Exhaustion. And something else. The bone-deep satisfaction of knowing she'd been right, that her stubbornness had saved a life. Alessandro looked up at her. Thank you doesn't cover it. But thank you. You're welcome, Mr. Leonetti. Alessandro, he corrected. After everything, I think you've earned the right to use my name. The restaurant in Little Italy was small, unremarkable from the outside, the kind of place tourists walked past without noticing. But in the back room, behind a heavy door marked private, the real business happened. Alessandro sat alone at a corner table when Marco was brought in. It had been 24 hours since the council meeting. 24 hours for Marco to realize his life as he knew it was over. He looked smaller now, diminished. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his confident smile long gone. The guards positioned him in the chair across from Alessandro and left.
No handcuffs.
No weapons visible. Just two cousins, separated by a table and a betrayal that couldn't be undone. Alessandro poured 2 glasses of wine from a bottle on the table. He slid one across to Marco. Drink, Alessandro said. Marco stared at the glass like it might be poisoned. Is this it? You're going to kill me here? If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. Alessandro took a sip of his own wine. Drink, Marco. It's a 1947 Bordeaux. Our grandfather's favorite. Seems appropriate. Marco picked up the glass with shaking hands and drank. The wine seemed to steady him slightly. I don't understand, Marco said finally. You could have killed me last night. The council would have approved it. Why am I still breathing? Because I'm not a monster, despite what you apparently think. Alessandro leaned back. Your family. That still means something to me, even if it means nothing to you. Family, Marco laughed bitterly. You don't know what it's like, Alessandro. You've had everything handed to you. The business, the respect, the power. While I've spent my entire life in your shadow, being told I'm not quite good enough, not quite Leonetti enough. So you tried to destroy an 8-month-old baby. I tried to save the family. Marco's voice rose. You're weak, Alessandro. Everybody sees it. Since Maria died, you've been obsessed with that child, making decisions based on sentiment instead of strategy. The families are starting to question your judgment.
No, Marco.
You question my judgment. You projected your own inadequacy onto everyone else. Alessandro's voice was quiet, lethal. The families respect strength, yes, but they respect honor more. And you have none. Marco slumped in his chair. So what now? You banish me, take everything I've worked for, and I'm supposed to just... What? Disappear? You're going to a safe house in Vermont. Remote, secure, comfortable enough. You'll have an allowance, small, but sufficient. And you'll have guards. For your protection, Of course, Alessandro's smile was thin. But really, they're to make sure you stay put. You're imprisoning me. I'm keeping you alive. There's a difference. Alessandro finished his wine. You tried to prove Valentina wasn't Leonetti blood. The DNA results came back this morning. 99.97% certainty that she's mine. I've sent copies to every family, every ally, every person who might have heard Marco's poison. Congratulations. You have your heir. I have my daughter. Alessandro stood. Here's what else you should know. Mrs. Delacroix's daughter in Boston? She did need surgery. Experimental treatment for stage 4 lymphoma. But the surgery happened 2 years ago, fully paid for by insurance. Her daughter is in remission. You lied to Mrs. Delacroix about needing money, exploited a mother's fear, and manipulated her into betraying the child she cared for. Marco's face went white. That specialist, David Reese? He's talking.
Told us everything.
How you promised him $300,000 for the samples and the sedatives. How you planned to doctor the DNA results, present them to the families, create just enough doubt to fracture the alliance. How you were already negotiating with a Chicago outfit to back your claim to leadership.
Alessandro.
I'm not finished. Alessandro's voice dropped to a whisper. You didn't just betray me, Marco. You betrayed every principle our family was built on. Loyalty. Protection of blood. Honors above ambition. You're not a Leonetti anymore. You're just a coward in expensive clothes. Marco's hands clenched on the table. If I'm such a coward, why not kill me? End it. At least give me that dignity. Because my daughter is alive and healthy, and that makes me generous. Alessandro moved toward the door. You'll leave for Vermont tonight. You'll stay there until I decide otherwise. And you'll spend every day knowing that you gambled everything on hurting a baby, and you lost. The family needed strength. The family needed men with spines and hearts. You have neither. Alessandro opened the door. The guards waited outside. Take him. As Marco was led away, he looked back one last time. She'll never be safe, you know. There will always be someone who wants what you have. Someone who'll see her as a weakness to exploit. Alessandro met his eyes. Let them try. They'll learn what you learned. I'll burn the world before I let anyone hurt her again. Marco disappeared down the hallway. Alessandro stood alone in the back room, staring at the 2 wine glasses on the table. His phone buzzed. A message from Frank. Marco's safe house detail is ready. Reese is being transferred to federal custody as part of a cooperation deal. Mrs. Delacroix has been released with a severance and an NDA. The house is clean. Alessandro typed back. Good. I'm coming home. Home. Where Valentina was waiting, finally safe, finally protected from the darkness that had tried to swallow her. He'd won this battle. But Marco's parting words lingered like smoke. There would be others. There always were. People who saw vulnerability as opportunity, who saw love as weakness. But they would all learn the same lesson Marco had learned. Alessandro Leonetti protected what was his. And nothing, no ambition, no alliance, no threat, would ever come between him and his daughter again. He left the restaurant and stepped into the afternoon sunlight, already thinking about the future. About teaching Valentina to be strong without being cruel. About building an empire she could inherit without fear. About being the father Maria had always believed he could be. The war was over. But the work of peace, the work of actually raising his daughter right, was just beginning. 1 week later, the mansion felt different. Sunlight streamed through the nursery windows, catching dust motes in golden shafts. Valentina lay on a play mat, batting at hanging toys with determined fists. Her cheeks were pink, her eyes bright and alert. She looked like a different baby, like the healthy, thriving child she was always meant to be. Mira sat cross-legged beside her, gently encouraging her to reach for a soft rattle. The baby's laughter, a sound Mira had rarely heard before, filled the room like music. She's getting stronger every day, a voice said from the doorway. Alessandro stood there, dressed more casually than Mira had ever seen him, dark jeans and a simple black sweater. His hair was slightly mussed, and there were still shadows under his eyes, but something fundamental had shifted in him. The constant tension, the coiled readiness for violence, had softened. She is, Mira agreed. Yesterday, she almost rolled over by herself. Alessandro entered and crouched beside them. Valentina immediately reached for her father, making excited babbling sounds. He scooped her up, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Dr. Hamish came by this morning while you were out, he said. Full examination. Clean bill of health. No lasting effects from the sedatives or the stress. His voice caught slightly. She's going to be fine. I know. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Valentina explore her father's face with curious fingers, pulling at his nose, grabbing his hair, completely unaware of how close she'd come to being a pawn in someone else's game. I've made some changes, Alessandro said finally. The household staff has been reduced by half. Everyone remaining has undergone extensive background checks. New security protocols. No one enters this wing without my explicit permission. That's good. And I've assigned you as Valentina's primary caregiver. Full authority over her care, her schedule, everything. Mrs. Chun is handling general nursery support, but you're in charge. Myra's breath caught. Alessandro, I'm not qualified. You saved her life. You trusted your instincts when everyone else dismissed them. You risked your job, possibly your safety, to protect a child you barely knew. He looked at her directly. That makes you more qualified than anyone. I don't have credentials. No formal training. I don't care about credentials, his voice was firm. I care about loyalty. About someone who sees my daughter as a person, not a political asset. You've proven that's who you are. Mira felt tears prick her eyes. She'd spent her whole life being overlooked, being told she wasn't quite enough, not educated enough, not polished enough, not important enough. And now the most powerful man she'd ever met was telling her she was exactly what his daughter needed. Thank you, she whispered. Alessandro handed Valentina back to her and stood. There's something else you should know. The families have accepted the DNA results. The alliance is stable. And I've sent word through every channel. Anyone who questions Valentina's legitimacy, anyone who threatens her safety, answers to me personally. What about Marco? He's in Vermont. Miserable, isolated, and under constant surveillance. He'll stay there until I decide he's no longer a threat. Which might be never. Alessandro's expression hardened. David Reese is cooperating with federal authorities on unrelated medical fraud cases. In exchange, we're not pressing charges. Mrs. Delacroix is in Boston with her daughter, with enough money to start over and strict instructions to never contact this family again. You let them live. I let them live because my daughter is alive and healthy. If things had ended differently, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mira looked down at Valentina, who was now chewing contentedly on a teething ring. She won't remember any of this. When she grows up, this will just be a story. Something that happened when she was too young to understand. Good. Alessandro moved toward the door, then paused. Mira, you need to understand something. You're not just a maid anymore. You're not even just a nanny. You're part of my inner circle now. The people who know my secrets, who guard my family, who I trust with everything. I understand. I'm not sure you do, he turned back, his dark eyes intense. Being in that circle makes you powerful. It also makes you a target. There will be people who see you as a way to get to Valentina, to get to me. You need to be careful. You need to be smart. The weight of his words settled over her like armor. Mira had spent the past 2 weeks focused entirely on protecting Valentina. She hadn't thought about what came after, about what her life would look like now that she was entangled with the Leonetti family. I can handle it, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Alessandro studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. I believe you can. He left, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Mira looked around the nursery, the elegant furniture, the expensive toys, the windows that overlooked grounds worth millions of dollars. A world she'd never belonged to, never imagined being part of. But as Valentina grabbed her finger with a strong, healthy grip, babbling happily, Mira realized something important. She hadn't entered this world chasing power or money or status. She'd entered it because a baby needed help and no one else was listening. And now that baby was safe, thriving.
Loved.
Everything else, the danger, the politics, the complicated new reality of being Alessandro Leonetti's trusted protector, she'd figure out as she went. You know what, little one? Mira whispered, lifting Valentina into her arms. I think we're going to be just fine. Both of us. Valentina cooed in response, resting her head against Myra's shoulder with complete trust. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows. The mansion's grounds stretched endlessly, beautiful, imposing, fortress-like. But in the nursery, in that moment, everything was simple. A child who'd been in danger was now safe. And the woman who'd saved her had found something she'd been searching for her whole life without knowing it. A place where she mattered, where her instincts, her stubbornness, her refusal to look away from suffering made her not just useful, but invaluable. Mira Chen was no longer invisible. She was the person Alessandro Leonetti trusted most in the world to protect what he couldn't lose. And that made her more dangerous than anyone in the mansion had ever realized.
The end.